Sure. So what I'm understanding from that is no stakeholders outside of ATSB have been involved in the review by TSB.
That's my understanding, Senator.
Do you think that's appropriate?
I've left to the TSB the decisions as to how best to meet the terms of reference that were agreed and therefore to undertake the investigation.
But it's the preferred course of the ATSB that the TSB just look at the documents and if need be speak to people within the ATSB, that you're more comfortable with that approach?
The preferred course of the ATSB is that the TSB makes its own independent decisions about what it needs to look at and finalise an independent report into the adequacy of our procedures and how we applied them in the case of 3 investigations.
Mr Murdoch, is there a draft of that report available?
I don't believe a draft has been completed at this stage, Senator. I think from Mr Dolan's evidence he's expecting a draft report.
Before Easter.
Before Easter.
So insofar as the ATSB quite appropriately will be able to comment on that draft report, will other interested stakeholders have an opportunity to comment on that draft report?
I'm not familiar with the process, Senator. I think Mr Dolan's indicated that the ATSB will make matters of fact comments, but essentially the report is a matter for the Canadian Transport Safety Board.
But Mr Murdoch, and again, and to Mr Dolan, I can understand completely it's entirely appropriate for the ATSB to comment on any draft, but wouldn't it also be appropriate for interested parties, the pilot, some of the witnesses, the pilot, the co-pilot witnesses who gave evidence in relation to their views on that, and indeed the Senate committee itself that spent an enormous amount of time in relation to dealing with the evidence, considering the evidence, that they would be part of that, because presumably if the TSB is going to be making comment on the Senate committee's report and its processes, wouldn't we have an interest as a stakeholder to comment on any draft?
Senator, I can certainly see an interest. I think I'd need to come back to you in terms of the process, as whether that is best done after the TSB has lodged a report. I think
well, no, I don't think that's quite... Well, that doesn't seem to address the issue, Mr Murdoch. If the ATSB will have an opportunity to comment on a draft report, which I acknowledge is entirely proper and appropriate, isn't it also entirely proper and appropriate for other interested parties, such as this committee itself, and the other parties directly involved in the Norfolk or the ditching of the Pearl Air aircraft, to also have an opportunity to comment on it?
Something I would have to take on notice, Senator, in terms of the next steps once the ATSB has had an opportunity to provide any factual comment as to whether the TSB would then be looking for a further comment. It may be a case, I think the intention of the ATSB was always that the TSB report would be publicly released.
No, that's not answering the... Sorry, I'm sorry, Mr Murdoch. That's not addressing the issue. The issue is one of fairness of process. The issue is one of due process. It's clearly due process for the ATSB to comment on the TSB draft. Entirely appropriate, but don't you think it's also appropriate for other interested stakeholders, particularly given that it seems to me that the trigger for the TSB's inquiry or report into the Pearl Air incident and the ATSB's report was highly critical comments by this committee, references committee that looked into it. I would have thought in terms of procedural fairness that a Senate committee ought to have an opportunity to comment to the TSB if the very basis of the inquiry by the Canadian TSB was the trigger for it was this very committee's report.
Senator, I can see the point you're making. I'll need to take on notice and discuss that with perhaps the Canadian TSB about what their handling approach is.
Could you get back to this committee
Certainly.
as a matter of urgency in respect of that, please?
Mr Dolan, would you just be able to clarify? You said there were 3 investigations have been referred. Clearly the Norfolk Island was one. The other 2?
The other 2 were the Canley Vale crash, an aeromedical flight where a pilot and a nurse died, and the winching accident at Bridal Veil Falls, which was again an aeromedical procedure, and so we were looking at 3 that were in broadly similar territory, and they're the 3 that the TSB, after some suggestions from us, agreed were the appropriate to look at.
Sure. With the Canley Vale accident, were they also given access to CASA documents? Just given what we found in the Norfolk Island incident, where significant issues like CASA's own recognition that their oversight of the company was deficient, which was never reported nor disclosed to ATSB. Do TSB have the option to, or did they have the option and access to CASA personnel and information about the Canley Vale incident?
The question never arose, Senator. Their initial review was based on the material that was available to the TSB and interviews with the investigator in charge and others in the organisation. And I'm assuming, since there's been no request from the Canadians, that they weren't looking further than material that was already available to the ATSB.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can I ask one final question then, just to get on the record? The fact that CASA had determined that their own regulatory oversight of the company in question was deficient and materially impacted on the safety and things like fuel planning, etc. Can I just take from your comments that you think that was insignificant?
No, Senator. It was significant, but in the assessment of the ATSB, it was not new.
Okay,
We were aware of the territory that was covered, and I gave a formal response to the References Committee in relation to our views on the Chamber's report and its relevance to the Pell Air investigation.
Just confirming, though, in that response you did say that that you weren't aware of the Chamber's report. You're aware they had done a special audit, but you weren't aware of the Chamber's
That's
report?
correct, Senator.
So you've just said it's significant, and you've just confirmed that it is new. To my mind, that very clearly brings about the two criteria for reviewing the efficacy of the report.
I don't think, Senator, I said it was significant. I did say it was new.
Could I just make a clarification? If there was a review to be had by the committee, Senator Foote, it would be the Reference Committee, wouldn't it? Wouldn't be this committee.
That's correct.
So I apologise, the References Committee.
And that's fine. Thanks,
All
Chair.
right. Well, I don't see why you blokes shouldn't go and have a cup of tea and get the next mob in. See you, boys. I now call